Welcome to It Just Means More Football and Coffee. Happy Saturday morning to you, or whatever day and time you choose to be listening to this. My preference, of course, is that, we're just going to pretend that it's game day because here college football never stops and neither does our cup of coffee. Craig, I'm a homer today. I'm rocking the Gamecock Cup. Little shout out to the basketball team. Lamont Paris has the boys 20-3. And so I'm still garnet and black over here, even though we put that to the side. Look at the SEC and look at all of college football. Excited about what we have going on today. Great guest coming up, and our managing editor, Tony Siracusa. But let's start off with how you're doing. What's going on? We are here on episode 2, and I feel like the audience, they don't know us, Craig. So tell us, who is Craig McMichael, and what's your connection to the SEC?
Sure. I feel like that is a deep philosophical question. I'm sure my therapist could probably give a fuller report there, but I'll give you the thing. My name is Craig McMichael. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, but been a Bulldog fan for a long time. And you may be asking, what's this Detroit guy doing all with Georgia? Well, 2005, I moved to the great state of Georgia, went to Georgia State University in Atlanta, and was able to go to a couple of Georgia games. But really, my 2 years down in Georgia indoctrinated me into the SEC and SEC culture. I grew up a Big Ten guy, thought it was something special, thought it was different. Well, I figured out what it just means more really means, and really just totally been fully in with Georgia ever since. I live here in Detroit. I've got a wife and a little girl here, so she's a big Alabama fan, so we got to work on that a little bit, but I feel like she does that just a little bit to get after her dad. But as you can oversee in my left shoulder here, we've got the mailman holding up the first national championship trophy back in 2021. But, really just honestly, I enjoy writing about the SEC, and I enjoy writing about college football. For the last word, I will put out about an article a week, something Georgia specific. I will also do something SEC related. But yeah, excited to be chatting with you every week here, Rob.
Yeah, it's been fun. Already there's a little bit of buzz about the show. Like I said, episode 2, and we've already got some great feedback and some really good responses. From just people in the social media community, but also from our colleagues and peers at Last Word. And so it's good to see, other writers hearing us talk about football as we just kind of, shoot the bull and sip on a cup of coffee and sit around and do what guys and girls who love college football are going to do. I feel like this show is really more, even though we're both writers and we're covering the sport, we're working the beat a little bit. It comes from the fan perspective a little bit, and we're trying to take our goggles off and not be zoned in on Georgia and South Carolina, but to look at the league and to look at the national scope and see how we can address these issues and kind of speak to them a little bit. But I want to keep it coming from this fan perspective. It's an everyman type of vibe, type of show. What you get when you're just sitting around with a cheeseburger and a cold drink or whatever the case may be. In this case, it's a warm cup of coffee and a sausage biscuit. And here we are, and it's morning time. We're getting ready for the day. So signing day, did it blip on your radar at all? It's National Signing Day in February. It's just crazy. I actually, South Carolina wrapped everything up early. Wasn't really much to cover and much to make note of in February. What about for you, for Georgia? And looking around the SEC, there just wasn't a lot of buzz.
No, honestly, I think everybody kind of wrapped it up. I know Georgia was in on a 5-star athlete. I believe he's still signed with Texas A&M. I probably should have had that for the show, but didn't prepare as well as I probably should have. That's okay. Don't fire me.
That would be Terry Bussey, who is the top-rated athlete in the country. And originally committed to A&M, gets cold feet with the Jimbo firing, ends up sticking with them. So, even for something that felt like, oh, here we're going to get some drama and some excitement, no excitement. He goes right back to where he was already committed, and nothing shakes up. And that's pretty much the story of February signing day these days.
Yeah, honestly, it really was. I mean, you look at even Georgia's social media profile. it was all about who's in the Super Bowl, kind of what's going on. Georgia wrapped up the #1 class. We've got a number of the top rated recruits, stuff like that. I think the focus is on 2025 and making sure that they're going forward. So honestly, National Signing Day really wasn't a thing. It seems like a relic. It seems something that we enjoyed and talked about, but this thing of the past.
Is it possible that all of that gets shaken back up, in the next few years as changes are coming to the sport and the national landscape? And we're going to get to this with Tony, but talking about the new partnership between the SEC and the Big Ten, with not only Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey, but with university presidents, ADs, and others who are going to be involved in that partnership. What maybe the whole schedule gets shaken up and we see a new signing day model moving forward. I don't foresee us really having a lot of attention in February again, but potentially. It could happen that there's not going to be 2 signing days. December is just way too full as it is, so they're going to have to move something out of that month to make things a little more free.
I think February maintains. What you see is that December signing period. I think there's a lot of momentum and a lot of thought about moving that just before the season. And I think we have the out. Players get to leave if a coach leaves. Coaches are going to leave. Those commitments, those are going to be open. It gives you that opportunity. Once that coach leaves, that kid's got a couple of months to do that. So if anything, I think going forward, what you see that push back to the summertime. Kind of open up a little bit. You've already got the portal. You're going to have the playoff in December. Give some of that space and flexibility back.
Anybody jump off the page to you in terms of SEC teams from now that we're officially wrapped on the signing class?
Yeah.
Anything just screaming at you like, hey, this is catching my attention. It's impressive.
Yeah, I mean Alabama was 2. We'll see what happens going forward. But to me, Texas. What Sarkisian is doing at Texas, he is setting up to take that place of where Saban is, where Georgia, Alabama was the first part of the 2020s. The second part of the 2020s, sorry, South Carolina fans, is going to be Georgia versus Texas. What Sark is doing not only in the portal but also with recruiting, he's going to be right there, and I think he's primed to take that spot. So that's my biggest one. What about you? Any big things that out?
I think Bama is really the thing that sticks out to me. DeBoer, obviously a lot of that's wrapped up with the early signing period before the moves are made, and you did lose Sayin out of that class, but holding on to the number 2 national class is impressive for me. And I know that there were some portal departures, but Kalen DeBoer has been a less with more type of guy, so I'm interested to see what he does with more. Now that he's going to come in and you get a talent-rich team, can he recruit? Maybe not at the number 2 class nationally, but I think it's going to be easy for him to hold on to top 10 classes moving forward, just because of the prestige of Alabama and the fact that he's going to continue to keep them moving in a good direction. So I'm just interested to see you get a number 2 recruiting class. That's really good talent coming in. We've seen him do a lot with quote unquote lesser talent. What does he do when he's loaded with top tier, blue chip type guys? That's kind of what I'm keeping my eye on. The other thing I would say is just overall across the league, how many teams you see loading up the front end of the national scene when it comes to recruiting. It's been that way for a long time, but it never ceases to amaze me when you look at, the top 25, top 30 teams in the nation, how many of those are SEC schools. And, from a South Carolina perspective, or anybody in that bucket, a Kentucky, a Missouri, you look at from a recruiting standpoint, nationally, you get a top 20 class, and then you go back and look at the league and you're still, middle of the pack at best. And so it's interesting to see how you can climb, but not really make a whole lot of headway. As we kind of transition a little bit, and we're talking about college football, talking about the NFL, and we're looking at draft profiles, and we're looking at different things like that. We've seen some coaching moves. It's possible that we're going to see more and more coaches going from college football to the NFL just because the hours are going to be easier. Latest move is Boston College head coach Jeff Haftley taking the defensive coordinator position at Green Bay. The other hot name trying to get out is Chip Kelly, and I'm interested to see what happens with him at UCLA. Does he find another place to go? And what type of dominoes, as we continue to see head coaches leave, the portal is inevitably always open because of that rule. How many coaches are we going to see say, you know what, I'm out of here. Don't want to do this 24/7 recruiting the nation and recruiting my roster and all of this. Yep. And I'm just going to go to the NFL and coach guys who are under contract.
Yeah, I think that's huge. What I think you see happen too, I heard earlier this week on the College Football Inquirer, Haftley and Kelly probably fortunate to still have a job this year. Definitely on the hot seat going to 2024. So Absolutely. It's that idea of getting out before you get fired, even though you're going to have a nice golden parachute. It's that ability. But what I think you're seeing happen is who's going, I would love to say, hey, you're not going to see it at the top, but three of the four coaches that were in the national championship, one is in the NFL, one went from the Big Ten to the SEC, and another retired. I think just the movement and stability that we were used to at one time is over and it's gone. You're going to see guys going back and forth, flipping back and forth between college and NFL, and it's the same thing that we all do in life. We're trying to figure out what is that next move that's going to help me either financially or professionally. You know what? Jeff Haftley is a hell of a defensive coordinator, did a great job at the 49ers, did a great job at Ohio State, spun that into a head coaching job at Boston College. Now he's headed back to Green Bay, where, again, some of that stress, some of that idea isn't going to be there. So,
yeah, and it's interesting, I think, as we look at this, what do Tony Petitti, Greg Sankey, and the powers that be, what are they going to do to maybe bring about some change that's going to change that narrative for coaches to maybe want to stay where they're at? We'll have more on that partnership as we get into it with Tony Siracusa here in just a minute. All right, welcome back to It Just Means More Football and Coffee. We are here with our managing editor, Tony Siracusa. Tony has been with Last Word on Sports for 6 years, covering college football. He's been around the country, a native of Southern California. He's now in North Carolina, and he's been working in broadcast, print, digital media for nearly 30 years. So as a member of the Football Writers Association of America, voting panelist for the Outland Trophy, the Nagurski Award, the Biletnikoff Award, he has a lot of wisdom and knowledge and experience that we're looking forward to today. Look, Craig, here's the deal. We have management on the show. Josh Pate could never.
Oh, hang on.
He can only dream of actually bringing management onto the show. So we're excited to talk to Tony today. Tony, how you doing this morning? I saw you with your coffee a minute ago.
Craig,
what you got in there?
Craig seems like he's a little sheepish that he didn't shave this morning now.
Oh gosh, yeah. That's okay. It's not the first time I've been yelled at for that one, so it's okay.
Well, I got my coffee. I knew that was one of the requirements. I'm, on my 5th cup of coffee this morning already, so I'm good to go.
Jacked up and ready to go. What's in your cup?
Straight black coffee.
Straight black coffee. I'm a Maxwell House guy myself. I don't think we've gotten into this, Craig, necessarily. My theory is that if I drink Maxwell House daily black, that no matter what gets put in my cup, then it's going to taste good. So my taste buds have acquired the good to the last drop, and that's how we roll.
We went 2 episodes and out because I'm not drinking Maxwell House. So
well, look, I set the bar low. No matter what happens, look, if all of the SEC NIL collectives send us their coffee, then we'll start to promote it, and I'll drink, higher profile coffees. And I'm not above that, but I'll just set the bar at the bottom, and I'm ready for whatever you send me. I can handle it. Tony, how are we feeling? We are in the quote unquote off season. One of the things that we like to say on this show is that, college football never stops, and neither does our cup of coffee. But you're living that up this morning on your 5th cup.
That's right.
But we are in the quote unquote off season. Just, overall, what are your thoughts on how things are progressing before we get into some of the specifics of what we've seen happening in the past weeks?
I'm old enough to remember when there was an off season for college football. And now that you've got the second signing day, you've got a transfer portal window that is now allowed to open for players when their coach leaves, and we've got a lot of coaching moves in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. You've got a lot of off the field stories, that find us in the courtroom and following court cases. And, makes me glad that, one of my 2 minors in college was constitutional law. So, well equipped to read all the briefs and things like that. There's a lot of non-football or non-directed football kind of conversation that now goes on this time of year. And, a month from now, we're going to be talking about spring camp starting to open up around the country. So while I was looking forward to some slower times and slower periods, just to give you an example, a couple days after the national championship game, it was a Wednesday. I was actually getting ready to make dinner for my wife and myself, and sitting down and starting to chill. And then my phone starts going crazy as Nick Saban announces his retirement. And I was just like, you son of a gun, because I was looking forward to the first slow night in 6 months, and we were off and running. And of course, then that started a whole train of coaching moves around the country. So, yeah, you're right, Rob. There really is no off season anymore.
Yeah, there's been no shortage of things to talk about and headlines that have continued to dominate, which as writers who are covering the sport, I think we can appreciate. One of the most intriguing things to me as we look at it, and I'm interested to get your take as a Pac-12 guy and someone who covers the ACC now, quote unquote, the outside looking in with this new partnership between the Big Ten and the SEC. How quickly are we looking at college football zeroing in on those 2 conferences? Are we headed to a Power 2? And what do you think about the conferences breaking away from the NCAA?
I think we are headed to a Power 2. I think we've been headed there for a while. We just didn't want to acknowledge it. Yep. The minute these guys signed their new TV contracts, which were just astounding, and frankly, allowing schools to make double what schools in the ACC or the Big 12 were making, or even more than that with what was offered up at the end of the Pac-12, they were going to be the controlling factors. There's a little bit of a hink in the process. One, I think we need to look at this agreement, as they call it, an advisory panel, which is not just the 2 commissioners, but some coaches, administrators. And I'm gratified by Greg Sankey yesterday talking about one of their first issues is going to be NIL and the lack of guardrails, and with the portal as well, and with it just being a free-for-all. Part of the reason I like that is because when you look back at the Supreme Court decisions in the O'Bannon case and the Alston case, which really define where we are in college sports right now, everybody looks at Justice Kavanaugh's opinion because he called the NCAA a cartel. And there you go. There's your headline, right? Yeah. And it's big, and that's all we remember. It's a cartel. It's almost as if nobody bothered to read the rest of his opinion, which clearly said the NCAA does have some power because the schools voluntarily belong to the NCAA as a partnership. And if you don't like it, you're free to leave the NCAA. Now, of course, no school is going to do that on their own. Why? Because the NCAA controls the money. Not for football, but certainly for March Madness, the College Baseball World Series. And so they control the pocketbook for all of those. Those TV deals are theirs. And so for all the postseason stuff and the other sports. The other thing he said was, which seems to get overlooked a lot, was the conferences, however, are free to do as they wish. In other words, the things that the NCAA, every time the NCAA tries to fix the portal and go with what coaches want and administrators want, it takes about a week or 2 and they're run into federal court on an antitrust lawsuit. And they lose, predictably. However, the conferences have signed agreements with the schools via the TV contracts. So there are rules and regulations which the conferences can enforce. They can do some of the heavy lifting that the NCAA cannot. So now we go back to your question, Robin. We've got this partnership. It is only the 2 because they're the 2 movers and shakers right now. in terms of revenue, in terms of size. I don't even remember how many teams are in the Big Ten now, how many schools are in there now that they added the 4 from the West Coast. It's just a lot, right? So it was inevitable that it was going to be those two. There is going to be a little bit of a side eye look from the other conferences. Brett Yormark is not happy that the Big 12 was left out. Jim Phillips is not happy. There is a lot of distrust, I will tell you, towards Greg Sankey. Look, we had, what was it, 3 years ago when we had this ridiculous alliance with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the ACC. And the whole point of that alliance was to pump the brakes on Greg Sankey's mission for the playoff expansion. Those 3 conferences didn't like Sankey's plan. They created a voting block. There is a lot of lingering distrust towards Greg Sankey. So he's got a lot to overcome.
Wasn't Sankey, though, 3 years ago, if I remember correctly, wasn't he on a panel where it was him, Jack Swarbuck from Notre Dame? Was there someone else from the Pac-12? Weren't they looking at, pitching the new playoff format? And as they were doing that, then they got that information that Texas and Oklahoma, all of a sudden made that decision. So that's where we see the alliance kind of pop up. And then with the alliance, you get the Big Ten coming in and starting to take USC and UCLA. To me, like, I'm looking at this and, like, sure, there could be some guardrails, but to me, this feels like the end of World War I, or any history scholar, Big Ten and SEC are going to go through. They're going to divide up the map, and we've gutted the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is now gone. They took the powerful parts. Now they're going to look at the ACC, and they're going to say, okay, where are the 4 or 5 schools? How are we going to divide it up? And then I think there's going to be some conversation. But to me, that's what I feel like this is happening. And Yormark, I love what he's doing in the Pac-12. They can complain. Jim Phillips, he's going to complain, but, like, there's no position from they can yell and scream, but that's about it. They have no more teeth because of those TV contracts.
No, I think you bring up a good point, Craig. But I think part of what it is too is we get caught up in the hyperbolic headlines. The minute this 2-conference advisory council was formed, there we go, the end of the NCAA. Well, not really.
Yeah.
What I do see first and foremost is not so much the conferences pulling away from the NCAA, not yet, but college football pulling away from the NCAA, because there's already a national canvas of support for that among coaches and administrators, feeling that their issues are different than the rest of the sports. If you do that and you pull away, obviously you need someone to run the college football entity, whatever it is going to be called. Sure. And of course, people are going to look towards Sankey, for that, whether it's him or someone else. Sankey's name is always going to be at the forefront of all of these conversations. And I think that's where you get some of the pushback against him. But what would that would allow, if you just do it with football, it would go back to what you're talking about, Craig, which is the other sports can almost reconfigure into the 2 or 3 viable conferences and reformulate on a regional basis, so that you don't have the UCLA women's tennis team going to Piscataway to play Rutgers, over the course of a weekend. They can actually reformulate now that you're just down to those 2 or 3 on a regional basis and kind of go back to where it was and let football exist in its own vacuum. I think that's where we're headed, but I got to warn people, it's 2 years away. It's not going to happen this year. It's 2 to 3 years away, because getting 70 schools to agree to this and agree to the steps to get there is really quite a task.
Yeah, and you wonder what is that, because we have TV dollars, we have TV money that's already dished out. I mean, primarily, yes, that's football, but we see that trickle down with, basketball and some of those other sports. You wonder what that does to those contracts if we have that football breaking away. We've got 40 teams, give or take, probably less, that are going to be there. is that something different? Is that, how is that divided up? How that goes. I mean, it seems like we're opening Pandora's box, much like, transfer portal on IL. There's no, I'm not sure how we're going to close this and really rectify,
Yeah, I would say this is not going to be a smooth transition. None of
Sure.
this has been.
Yep.
While NIL in its purest form, and that being the relationship between an athlete and the sponsor, deliverables from the athlete in exchange for money from the sponsor, was absolutely necessary. Now we've got collectives and legalized money laundering and all of this nonsense. And there are always these unintended consequences. Nobody envisioned the transfer portal being unfettered free agency, but every time the NCAA tries to restrict it, maybe go to you get the one free transfer, and then you got to sit out a year, what they call the in residence rule.
Yep.
And they get slapped down in federal court, and then we're back to the way it was or the way it is. The transfer portal was a good idea. The unintended consequences with which we're currently living are terrible. So it's not going to be smooth. It's going to be another bumpy couple of years as we work through these changes and come out on the other side.
You made mention of Craig kind of mentioned we're going to the ACC now in terms of if we start to look at the Big Ten and the SEC starting to pick off schools, and Sankey has been vocal about the SEC wanting to stay in congruent states, right? So it makes sense now with the ACC kind of being the next conference up on the docket that you start to pick some of those off. I want to read you this quote from Paul Feinbaum, of all people, Tony, and just kind of get your thoughts here. He's speaking in light of the alliance that we talked about between the Big Ten, Pac-12, ACC. He says, but ultimately that has come back to haunt, especially the ACC, because the Pac-12 really is no more than a name. That's a league that really has to figure itself out. Where does the ACC go from here if they start to lose premier schools? Is that inevitable? Is that where we're headed? And how do they save the conference? For me, if I'm an ACC guy and you're covering the conference, I'm a little concerned.
Should be, absolutely should be. What we're not going to know, there's going to be lots of forecast of what's down the road for the ACC and this new world. We're not going to know until we've settled court cases. We have the ACC versus Florida State University Board of Trustees, which was filed in Mecklenburg County Court. We have Florida State University versus the Atlantic Coast Conference, which was filed in Leon County, Florida. There's going to be there's going to have to be a merging of the cases at some point. I don't think they belong in Charlotte. I think contractually it should be in Florida. I'm hoping they're in Charlotte because the courthouse is about 20 minutes from my house, and my rear end will be parked in that courthouse every day of the trial, if it's there. Look, Florida State is suing to get out. They're suing to get out of the grant of rights. From the minute I got to ACC territory, I was told the grant of rights was unbreakable. It was like, Moses carrying the tablets down, the mountains. That's how strong it's not. We found we found 2 or 3 small holes in it right away. But 2 years ago, I started telling people, Florida State will be the one to litigate its way out. And they do have cause to litigate their way out. There were violations of the contract, and there were so many things. I actually have a copy of the grant of rights, which is, in the lawsuit against Florida State, the ACC says they breached confidentiality with the contract. Florida State's a public school. You file a Freedom of Information Act, and they send you a copy of it. You don't have a choice, right? So I've got a copy of it. We read through it. It's all of 4 pages long, 3.5 pages long. That's it. It misses out on a lot. Point being, Florida State is going to find a way out. Yep. The idea that there will be some sort of, agreement out of court, you can't if you're the ACC. The minute you reach an out-of-port settlement with Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia are in line right behind them to take theirs. The only way the ACC can sustain itself is a judicial verdict in its favor in court, maintaining the grant of rights. That's it. Anything short of that, and the ACC starts to break up. You know, Florida State. It's ironic because what would help Florida State the most is to have that media partner help grease the skids, right? I know there's a lot of talk of them going to the Big Ten, but have ESPN help ease them into the SEC instead. But the filing from Florida State against the ACC just slaps ESPN all over the place for a lot of malfeasance. So I don't know how that turns out, but it will be the beginning of the end. There won't be a home for schools like Syracuse, Boston College, Wake Forest, you know, and Virginia Tech and a bunch of others. So there'll probably be a new group of 5 conference that winds up getting built out of that, or they merge into something else. While the top 4 or 5 schools from the ACC go somewhere else. It's part of the reason Jim Phillips brought in Stanford, Cal, and SMU, even though geographically it makes no sense. The TV contract with ESPN mandates that you have at least 14 schools in the conference at all time. He knew they were vulnerable. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew they were vulnerable and had to go get some other schools.
Yeah, you kind of feel like Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia are kind of like, you know, like just kind of like behind Florida State, like we're pumping them up, we're excited, but you know, you go do it, you go bust through that door first, and then we're good.
Yeah, I don't even know that they're pumping them up. I'm gonna say they're sitting quiet. They've got their lawyers watching everything that happens, reading through the filings, seeing what works and doesn't work. Florida State is a problem for the rest of the ACC schools because Florida State has been so loud about this. They've been so vocal since last summer, talking about how dissatisfied they are. And it ruffles the feathers of the other ACC schools, which really just kind of coexist in a quiet demeanor. You know, it's very genteel in the way they handle things. And so I think they'll just sit by quietly, hopeful that Florida State is successful so that they have options, because the grant of rights going through 2036 for the ACC is absurd. It's utterly ridiculous. The key to Florida State, or for Florida State, is their claim that the TV contract only goes through 2027, that the schools got locked in under the ruse of a contract extension with ESPN, but the contract only goes through 2027, and after that ESPN has a unilateral ability to extend on a year-by-year basis, but the schools don't have the ability to do anything on their own. So that's a big contract issue in this legal fight. But yeah, to your point, Rob, then you start picking off the ACC, and I guarantee the commissioners have already kind of circled which schools they're looking at. You know, if you look at the SEC, Florida will put up a fight against Florida State coming in, but you're only going to give Florida so much of a voice in that. South Carolina will complain about Clemson coming in, but you're only going to give South Carolina so much of a voice before you're like, okay, we heard you, great. We just signed we're about to go sign the contract with Clemson. So
I think there's something to be said for the SEC going after flagship schools as well. So I look for North Carolina to be one of those first ones that Sankey goes for. It tends, you kind of see that with a lot of the other institutions that they brought in, namely Texas and Oklahoma most recently. Yep. You know, you're bringing in kind of the flagship school of the state.
I agree. Virginia is going to have options because Virginia academically is an elite level school, and they're going to have options. The Big Ten, while they're going to be flexible on AAU academic status, Virginia meets the criteria right now today. Yep. So, you know, they're already kind of starting. The commissioners are starting to look at this kind of stuff, which makes this now pairing with Petiti and Sankey interesting, because they're going to be going head to head competing for some of the schools as other conferences start to devolve.
Yeah.
Like, I think it ends up looking
Yeah, it's keeping your enemies close, right? It's making sure that we know exactly those movements,
Sure.
and also paying attention to what's going on when we both leave the conference room, because who those conversations have.
Yeah, we've seen this movie before where the failed alliance existed, and then the Big Ten goes and pulls 4 teams from the pack. So we'll see how it plays out. Hey, Tony, thanks a lot for being here with us today. We appreciate it. We do a segment as we close up called The Last Word, just kind of a hat tip to where we're writing from. And so my final question from you, last word, is what's your favorite pizza topping and why is it pineapple?
Because you guys already know the answer. As a Sicilian, as a proud Sicilian, pineapple on a pizza, frankly, you should be brought to the Hague for crimes against humanity. That's just it's never forgivable.
I actually agree with you, but if I'm being honest, I'll take barbecue sauce and some and chicken and red onion all day.
Well, that's fine. I'm okay with the creativity of that.
Yep.
To me, pepperoni always belongs on there. You could build out from that with peppers and onions and whatever else you want. That's fine. But I am unmovable when it comes to the pineapple. That is a crime against humanity and deserves to be brought in front of the international court.
Hey, serious last word. Let our viewers and listeners know what they're missing out on, from just another voice. Obviously, we've advocated for it, but what they're missing out on if they're not tuning in and reading all the content that's coming out on a daily basis on Last Word on Sports, and specifically Last Word on College Football.
Yeah, if your audience, then make sure they go to lastwordonsports.com and click on the college football link. And we've got great stuff, covering yesterday's signing day and what it means for the teams going forward, even though the February one is a little lighter. We've got great player profiles, the transfer portal. Like we said, there is no off season anymore. So we've got a lot. We've got a piece that everybody should read, especially in light of the Dartmouth case. Our West Virginia writer, Travis Kenobi, wrote about why college athletes should not want to become employees of the universities. It's a terrific piece. We've got, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, Twitter. I still call it Twitter because you can't send an X to somebody, but you can send a tweet to somebody. So it's still Twitter. And so that's their at last word on CFB. And they can find me if they want to, pick fights and argue, which people seem to want to do on social media. Go figure. At Tony Bruin.
Absolutely. At Tony Bruin. If you didn't catch that, make sure you go follow Tony and get all of his content covering Wake Forest, the ACC, and national college football news. And of course, the great mind behind editing most of the things that Craig and I get out there as well. If it wasn't for Tony, we would just be blabbering on a Word doc. So we're appreciative of him pushing us in the right direction.
The real pro. So I'm proud of the whole team we've got.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Tony. We appreciate you being here with us.
All right, guys, be well.
We'll talk to you next time.
All right, be well.
All right, Craig. So that was a great time with Tony. He is the ultimate pro. I love talking to him whenever we get a chance to. And I love his feedback personally for me. And so when we're looking at last word, what'd you have last week? What you got coming up for everybody to check out?
Yeah, sure. So last week I profiled Ladd McConkey and his ability to, what does his draft profile look like? But I also took a look at my Bulldogs. We had 4 guys really kind of show out at the Senior Bowl. I know your guy Rattler, and I'm going to let you get to him in just a second. But Tyke Smith was the MVP. Burton won Defensive Back Player of the Week. Kurt McConkey was the Wide Receiver Player of the Week, and then you had Rosemary Jack Saint also catch a touchdown in the game. So you've got some guys that are going well. So I highlighted all those guys, kind of what they did. But the Senior Bowl is a great opportunity. It's like Mama said, you don't have to impress all the girls. You just got to impress one. And I think, Georgia definitely did that quite a bit. What about you? What did you have going on?
Yeah, so primarily looking at the Senior Bowl with Spencer Rattler last week, quarterback award during practice over the course of the week, and then MVP in the game, 4 for 4 passing, and then that deep touchdown to Rosemary Jack Saint, which was a great grab, but a really good ball from Spencer as well. And, I think what he's been able to show is just the maturity level that he has developed over his time in college football. And so I wrote a piece last week talking about how he's a top 5 quarterback in the draft class. You kind of have the top 3 that are clear cut in Caleb Williams and Drake May and Jaden Daniels. And then beyond that, you get this hodgepodge of people, right? It's Penix, it's Nix, it's Rattler. People have JJ McCarthy in that group as well. And so I know how you feel about that, but he's on draft boards in that same grouping. And so how many quarterbacks are going in the first round is my question. And, and how much does that stretch out over the second and third round? If I look at primarily for me, you got Penix and Nix ahead of Rattler in that draft order. And I can pick apart those games and make a strong argument for Rattler. I won't give too many details. You have to go read the piece on Last Word. But I do think he's a top 5 quarterback, and that puts him for me probably in that second round range. So look, everybody, we're excited that you've been here with us today. It just means more football and coffee where college football never stops, and neither does our cup of joe. We're excited about everything that's coming up. Thanks again to Tony Siracusa for being with us today. For Craig McMichael, my name is Rob Williams. You can find us at McMicah7, at Rob Williams GCP on all platforms. We'll see you next week.
Have a great one.